Hello everyone and welcome to the Global Mapper webinar for the month of September. My name is Josie McKnight. I'm an applications specialist here at Blue Marble Geographics, and with me today is David McKittrick.
Hello Josie, and hello everyone once again. It doesn't seem like a month that we were sitting here before, but another month has come around. We're ready for another webinar. Thanks for joining us this morning. Today we were going to be talking about scripting. Apologies, I was a little bit lagging on my PowerPoint controls here. Scripting is the subject of today. We've had a lot of interest in this subject. We get a lot of emails coming into our inbox, a lot of people approaching us at trade shows, during training classes, asking about scripting. So we know there's a demand, and I know there's a lot of people having signed up for this webinar. It's great to have you join us, as I mentioned. We are going to be dealing with the introduction to scripting today. I know some of you have worked with some very high-end processes in scripting, but we're going to start with some of the basics. So if you're new to scripting, or if you want some direction as to how to efficiently design or develop scripts, this is for you. Again, we do get a lot of questions about the recording of our webinar. This session is being recorded as we speak. I click the record button, so what we're saying now will be available online, and obviously if you're listening to the recorded version of this, you have seen evidence of that. We will post this within the next couple of days. The webinar is going to take the form of certain scenarios. We're going to go through a certain number of workflows. I've already pre-packaged a lot of scripts. I'm also going to make those available for download along with the data that we're going to be pointing to. So look out for that as well. If you're looking at the recording, right below on the YouTube page or on our website, you'll see a link to download the data. And if you want to play along, maybe pause the webinar and go through the scenarios yourself. You will have an identical setup that I'm going to be using today. So that is certainly an opportunity you have to actually participate in the content that we're going to be covering today. One final thing before we get rolling. I know we've had issues in the past couple of webinars with our sound quality, and for that we apologize. We are working with the folks at GoToMeeting at Citrix to try to resolve those issues. If you do lose sound, it will come back. Be patient, it will come back. And again, if you need to backfill and get that content, you can see the recording. The recording will be in its entirety. You will not have any sound loss during the recorded version. So again, apologies if that happens. We'll try to make sure we resolve that issue going forward. But before we get rolling, Josie, a couple of things we need to cover.
Yep, that's right. All webinar attendees are in listen-only mode today, and you can... If you would like to submit a question about today's topic, you can use the questions tool on the GoToWebinar panel to the right of your screen. Blue Marble Product Specialists will try to answer your questions in written form as they're submitted, and we'll also try to get to some verbally throughout the webinar today. Yeah,
and we anticipate there probably is going to be quite a few questions because this is a pretty involved topic. I'm going to request you keep the questions, if you can, keep them relevant to what we're covering today. I know a lot of you use the opportunity to ask general questions. We certainly have opportunities for you to ask those questions through our forum, through our email links. You'll see the email address at the bottom of this screen. So try to keep those questions relevant to what we're covering, and the folks in the sideline who are answering those questions can then redirect the answers so that everyone should be able to see those. So if you haven't found the questions panel yet, look over to the left of the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see that little pop up, and you'll see again the graphic on the screen right now shows you what that will look like. A couple of events coming up. We're starting to get out on the road quite a lot.
Yes, on October 7th, we'll be at Intergeo in Berlin, Germany. We'll actually be there for a few days, and it'll be myself and David attending. We'll also be at the Texas GIS Forum on October 20th in Austin, Texas. And October 28th, we'll be at Gita's Oil and Gas Pipeline Conference in Houston, Texas. So stop by if you're at any of those events.
I'm going to Texas a couple of times within a week there, yeah. I'm looking forward to that Germany trip. The Intergeo Conference is a huge event. If any of you have been there, it is probably the biggest single event that we go to every year. I'm going to have some time to do a presentation, so I really look forward to meeting some of you, some of our European folks out there. We're really looking forward to attending that conference once again. Major event has happened, another one coming up.
That's correct. A couple of weeks ago, we hosted the first of the Blue Marble user group meetings in Calgary. So thanks for anyone that made it out. The weather conditions were a bit tricky that week, so thanks for everyone that made it. We had snow and interesting conditions. So.
Snow in September? You're kidding me? Oh, my goodness.
So the event, we had some great, informative, and interesting speakers, and we had really good feedback from all the attendees. We actually had the highest attendance of any of these events, so thanks everyone for coming, and congratulations to the winners of the Global Mapper and Geographic Calculator licenses that were given out in the drawing at that event. So, and we also had great feedback from the 2-day training that followed that event. And the weather carried on for a few days, so thanks for everyone that made it.
Well, I'm almost certain that come October 30th, when we're moving out of Houston, we will not have snow. There might be some other weather phenomenon, but I'm sure there won't be any snow there. Now, the pressure's on Houston now to carry on. We had a great time in Calgary, great feedback, as Josie said. Houston is the next stop, October 30th. Mark your calendar. It does coincide with the GITA conference that Josie mentioned previously. We're also doing some training there. I'll be doing a training class, so if you're in the area, you have 3 opportunities to interact with us. Training, the Blue Marble User Conference, and the GITA conference as well. So looking forward to meeting some of you there. Let's take a look at what we're going to be doing today. Let's take a look at our agenda. Where, or what, when, how, etc. I'll elaborate on that in just a little bit. Basically, we're going to ask some fundamental questions about scripting today. We're going to look at the structure of a script, the basic design, the way a script is formatted. We're going to talk about manually creating scripts, how a script can be generated in a text editing tool. We're going to talk about some of the supported commands. Now, if you're new to scripting, this may not mean anything to you at this stage. What is a command? Well, we'll cover that as well, obviously. We're going to go through some script samples. In fact, most of today's session is going to be dedicated to actually looking at examples of how a script works, some very simple workflows that can be defined as a script, and hopefully some of these workflows will relate to work that you do within Global Mapper. We're also going to address the issue of where to find help with scripting. What online resources are, or what available resources can you go to find more information about scripting. Well, time depending, we'll talk about some of the recent upgrades to scripting. Those of you who kind of follow the Global Mapper release cycle will be aware of the fact that every new version has a lot of new functionality, and we break those down by category. And if you look at the what's new documentation for the last several generations, you'll notice a significant part of that is new scripting commands that have been added, or new scripting parameters that have been added. So it's another part of the kind of the moving target that is Global Mapper. So that's the basic approach for today. The first question then, the first series of questions, what, where, when, how. I entitled this slide, Scripting Demystified. So there are my questions. What, why, how, when, where. Let's begin with what is a Global Mapper script. We're going to define that one actually on my next slide. I'm going to bypass that one for the time being. And obviously, before you get involved in scripting, it's a good idea to define exactly what it is. Why should you use scripting? What's the value in scripting? I'm also going to maybe point to some cases where maybe scripting is not the best option for your workflow. There may be visual elements to what you're doing that require you to interact more directly with the data, maybe on the map view or tweaking some settings. So scripting's not going to define every part of your Global Mapper workflow. It'll certainly accommodate a lot of the processes you do on a daily basis. Obviously, an important part of this is how do you create a script? We're going to go through that. Again, the initial section of our hands-on section, we're going to build a script, we're going to design scripts, we're going to show you how that structure is put together. When should you use a script? Again, this goes back to why. There are going to be certain situations when a script is going to simplify your workflow. You can set up multiple processes. You can set up a process against multiple files, and essentially let Global Mapper do all the work for you. And where can I find help? Well, you've got help today, obviously. We're hopefully going to give you some guidance in regard to how to build and create and develop your own scripts. But you also have our normal help resources. The forum is a great location for getting scripts. In fact, if you go to the forum, you'll notice a lot of people will actually put the body of their script actually into their forum post. And we can then look at that and see what maybe issues there are and what problems there are. There's also, as I mentioned before, online resources that define all the commands and show you all the parameters as well that can be applied in a script. So that's the kind of the outline of the questions that we're going to hopefully address over the course of the presentation today. So the first of those, and I don't use a whole lot of PowerPoint during my presentations, but this is a good one to put on PowerPoint. What is a Global Mapper script is a good place to start. Well, it's an easy-to-build process for streamlining workflow, essentially. And a lot of people are intimidated when they think of scripting, they think of programming, they think of somebody who has advanced programming capabilities. That is not required for Global Mapper scripting. If you can type into a text file, if you can open up Notepad and type some characters, you can create a script in Global Mapper. In fact, there are even easier ways of designing a script, which I'll deal with a little bit later. But basic scripting is text-based in Global Mapper. As I said, it's a simple ASCII text file that contains one or more commands and their associated parameters. I'll show you what I mean by commands and parameters in just a few minutes. Command is essentially an instruction. that instruction has to be followed by settings or configuration applied to that instruction. For instance, if you're importing something, the parameter would obviously be what file do you want to import and what are some of the settings you want to apply to that file. You'll see examples of those in just a second. So that's the basic structure. It is also, by way of definition, a way to automate most common data processing procedures without the need for manual importing or exporting. Really, that goes back to the why question. Why would you do this? Well, it simplifies your workflow. You do not have to repeat processes. You can define these processes at one time, generate that script, and again, automate the procedure, saving you time, saving you effort, and certainly eliminating possible mistakes as well. The best way to perform certain tasks on large volumes of data. Kind of reiterating what I've said before. I mean, you've got large, maybe numbers of tiles of imagery, and you need to process those, maybe convert them into a different format, perhaps merge them together, perhaps tile them so that they're multiple files. A script is the best way to do that. You don't have to repeat each setting with each file. You can do this in a collective process. And my final bullet here is a very cryptic one in defining what is a global mapper script. It is a workspace file in disguise. Not even in disguise, not a very good disguise. It is essentially a workspace file by a different name is probably the better way of putting that. We'll get back to that a little bit later. We'll cover that one. For the time being, let's kind of get into the basics of scripting. Now, I'm going to show you, if I navigate through my system here, a couple of folders. This is the folder that we're going to be working with today. Now, I draw attention to this because if you do choose to download the data that I'm going to be working with today, you will have exactly the same file contents that I have here. So you can follow in your own time, in your own computer, in your own situation, exactly the same procedures. As you'll see, I have a number of scripts. I've hopefully made them fairly intuitive in terms of the naming. I also, if I go up one level, have more specific instructions, and I have all of the data that I'm going to be using. Now, you will notice in the address field at the top of my window here, this is actually on the root of my C drive. This allows it to be installed in your system as well. So if you are doing this in your own time, again, follow the instructions in the README file, copy the entire contents of what you download to your C drive, and again, all of these scripts will work exactly as I'm going to show you today. So let's begin with the basics. The first file on my list here is the script structure. Now, this is actually not a script per se, but it defines the structure of a script. One requirement, in fact, the only requirement for global mapper scripting is the first line must include this text. Global mapper global underscore mapper underscore script, and then a space, version equals 1.0. Don't worry about which version you're in. There only is one version. There only ever has been one version. But that's what basically tells the scripting engine to look at the commands that will follow. You will notice that this file is simply a .txt file. You can generate script files in a text file. You can even run them as ASCII text files, or you can configure them to be recognized as scripts by changing that suffix to .gms. I will get to that process a little bit later. But basically, we start with that one line. Then on my second line, and I've left a space here just to simplify the visualization. You don't have to, but I'm leaving a line space between each command. My first command could be something like import. Perhaps the most common command you're going to find in scripting is import. This will simply say import. Your next parameter, or the parameter that follows, defines exactly what settings to apply to that initial command. So for importing, the parameter would likely be the file location. A second parameter may be the type of data. A third parameter may be what to do with that data. And there's no requirements here as far as how many parameters you have to establish. But you have the opportunity during importing or during any of the processes to define these parameters. Don't worry at this stage about what those parameters are. You don't need to memorize the commands or the parameters. I'll show you the scripting reference guide in just a little bit where you can get that information. You'll notice I've taken a new line to put a second command in. This command might be something that pertains to this data. After you've imported your file, you want to then perhaps generate additional data. You maybe want to edit it. You maybe want to reprocess it in some way. That second command will allow you to do that. And again, the parameters can be established. I've included an additional line of text here with a backslash at the start. This is a cue for Global Mapper to disregard the contents of this line. In other words, this is not part of the script. Good if you're sharing scripts or moving scripts around. You can put instructions or comments. What is the function of this next line, or what is the function of the line I've just typed? And you can type whatever you want in here. Global Mapper has been triggered to disregard it if it sees this character. And then we'll continue with another command and again another parameter value. So again, this is just the overview, the basic structure of a script. You can almost use this as your own template by way of getting started. And as a recommendation, if you are starting to build your own scripts, start with something very simple. I mean, you may have a very complex workflow that requires multiple steps and multiple configurations. Start with the basics. Start with importing. Start with importing a simple file and see if that works. And if it works, then yes, certainly you can come into your script and add to it. Add a parameter. Add another command. That allows you to determine if there are any possible issues, if there are any possible problems, or if there are any possible configuration changes you need to make to get the results you want. So don't jump in and try to define your entire workflow. Start with the basics, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. I want to close this file.
David, we had a question come in.
Coming in already, great.
Yeah, do scripts only work with a particular version of Global Mapper? I know this has come up a few times as people are looking to upgrade to version 16. They're wondering if their scripts will still work.
Yeah, and going backwards as well. We have had folks who have been using scripts for many generations of Global Mapper, and those scripts will still work today. I mean, the structure of the script has not changed. If you change your version of Global Mapper, it will automatically recognize that new version. So they are not version specific. That's a good question. So again, scripts that you've created over time will still work in the current version.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, so let's take a look at my first script. This is a script that I've created. I have changed the suffix to a .gms, which stands for Global Mapper Script, believe it or not. One of the proprietary formats that you encounter in Global Mapper. It was generated exactly the same way as my first example, obviously with something a little more realistic. And this is a script that I designed specifically to import some data. Now, you will notice that if you're kind of looking over to the left side, this is associated with Notepad. In other words, if I double-click in this file, it should open up as a text file. And I have to say that this is a very, very, very simple script. But it is a functional script nonetheless. Again, Global Mapper Script version 1. Import is my first command, and my only command in this case. And a space is required between the command and the parameter. And the only parameter that I've defined here is the path to the file. So the long and short of this script is, if I run this script, it will import this particular JPEG 2000 file. So let's take a look at that one. And for this, I'm actually going to open up the software. I'm using version 15.2. By the way, Josie just dropped kind of a little hint that we have actually released an updated version of Global Mapper. That's fine. We know it's been released. We've certainly spread the word. We will be introducing that next month, by the way. So I'm still working on the old version. I'm still behind the times here, but we will certainly address 16 this time next month when we do our webinar on the what's new functionality. So in this case, for this example, I'm going to have the software running, and I'm actually going to run the script from the file menu under Run Script. Many of you have encountered the file menu for different reasons, for importing and exporting. Perhaps you've bypassed this Run Script option. Now we'll go ahead and address that. And remembered where I was before. All I need to do is point to that GMS file and click Open. Now what you're going to see is a dialog box that confirms the contents of the script. It gives me a visual indication as to what's included in that script file, and this could have been a text file, by the way. I happen to have mine as GMS, but it could have been any ASCII format. And the only option I need to address here is Run Script, right at the bottom. And I'll click that option, and lo and behold, that file that I pointed to has been imported. So if you can define that workflow, you have introduced yourself to the world of scripting. It's as simple as that. Now, obviously, that's not a very practical or useful script. Needless to say, you may want to enhance this or change it in some way. And we're going to go through various examples of scripts that take that basic function, that basic command parameter function, and add to it to perform certain operations. So I'll go ahead and close the script window, and I'm going to unload this data. And we'll go back to the folder where we were previously and look at the second of my two script examples, which is the same basic command, except repeated 4 times. I have 4 different imagery tiles, and I'm going to import all 4. And I'm assuming you can anticipate what will happen here when I run that script. Let me close it first, so it's not open. And we'll go to Global Mapper and run that from the same file menu option import multi, click open. Again, we get a confirmation, a visual indication as to what's in that script, and run the script. And this time, as you can see behind the window, we have 4 imagery tiles, multiple files imported simultaneously. A variation on that theme is to import files from a directory. What we're doing here, by the way, in these first very simple examples of scripting, we're essentially mirroring functionality that you can perform in the interface itself. The file open command is basically what we defined in this first script. File open with multiple files selected in that open dialog box is what we defined in the second script. This third script is essentially pointing to the same 4 tiles, but in this case I don't have to define them individually. Instead, a slight different variation on the command that I'm using, import directory tree. Now, a question we often get asked in regard to scripting is, can you just begin to type and will Global Mapper understand you? Well, it's not quite that smart. There are requirements as far as syntax is concerned. If I typed out the word directory instead of just abbreviating it, the script would not work, obviously. So it has to recognize the specifics of what's required as far as this command is concerned. Don't feel, again, you have to memorize these. This is not something where in order to be proficient, you have to have it in your head exactly what all the commands or parameters are. There's an excellent online resource. You can even download that, save it locally in HTML format, have that available. And for every command, it will show you all the parameters, and obviously it will show you the syntax that's supported as well. So in this case, import directory tree is my command. Again, we're pointing to the directory within which those imagery tiles were saved. Let's try that and move my toolbar on. Let's tidy up my desktop just a little bit here. Got my LiDAR toolbar on. Maximize my screen real estate. There we go. And again, from the file menu, run script. This time importing our directory. And run the script. Exactly the same result as previous. So those are some very basic import processes, single files, multiple files, or directory. I'm going to add another parameter to the import process. We're dealing with rasters now, by the way, as you're aware. We're dealing with imagery. Let me go ahead and close that. And again, unload the data and take a quick look at the next one, which actually applies some additional processing. I've got the same import function to import the directory tree, in other words, all 4 imagery tiles within this folder, but I've added another parameter. You'll notice my parameter says color intensity with an underscore, and then an equals, and then the value, and color intensity of 5 in this case. This mirrors, again, what you can configure when you import a file. Go to the options for that particular layer and make an adjustment, in this case to the raster layer. You'll notice the space between my previous parameter and this parameter. No spaces between the parameter and equals and the value. There's no spaces in here. So we'll just go ahead and run that one, and you should see a slight difference in the imagery as it's imported. So again, run script. And we will confirm that one. And again, you'll notice I have the quality of the imagery is somewhat compromised here. I just applied an arbitrary value. But here we were able to achieve 2 things with one script. One, obviously, to import all the files, and the second, to apply a contrast. Now, let's consider this particular application in a more practical workflow. If your requirement is to process data, is to process files in some way, the folder that I pointed to could become almost like a Dropbox. So as files are delivered to you, or as you process files, or as they become available, all you need to do is simply copy them into that location, knowing that this script will automatically address every file in that location and automatically apply whatever parameter or parameter you've applied, in my case adjusting the contrast. So I could universally apply this contrast adjustment to any files that are dropped in there. And you may perform that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis depending on your workflow. So that script essentially, rather than me trying to remember what are the parameters, or how do I change this imagery, you've got it all scripted in that file. We've been dealing with rasters. Let me close this window and again unload the data. And change focus slightly. Let's talk about vectors. Obviously, the process would be the same. In this case, again, import, defining the location. This is a file of the U.S. states. It's a shapefile. I've defined the type as being a shapefile. If you don't have that parameter, or in many cases, if you omit a parameter, it will default to what the default value is. and it will recognize the type. So it's not always essential that you have things like type. There are certain defaults that are applied to certain script parameters. If you omit them, it will go back to the defaults. I've also defined the type of feature. Now, this is, for those of you who are fairly new to Global Mapper, you may not have gotten into this depth yet, but with vector features, you can assign them to a particular feature type. We've dealt with this. We dealt with this last month.
The digitizer webinar.
Digitizer
webinar.
Right. We had Josie digitize some fields, I believe, if memory serves.
Yes, that's correct.
So essentially, the state name here is the name of a feature type. What we're going to do in this script is import our shapefile and automatically assign that feature type during import. Let's go ahead and we'll run that one. And once again, I have to remember where I am here, feature type. I'm glad I named them appropriately. That's easier to follow. So again, run the script, and I have my states, and to verify what I configured, they are now the feature type state. So again, another multi-parameter command. Questions coming in there, Josie?
Yeah, there are a few, actually. One question is probably good to start with. What is the best way to begin the process of creating a script?
I'm going to talk a little bit later about the relationship between a script and a workspace, which may, for many situations, be a logical approach to beginning the process. I kind of hinted at that with my PowerPoint slide. You know, it's a script is a workspace with a different name, I guess. We'll talk about that because that can become a good foundation or a good starting block, if you like. Other than that, well, obviously you have access to these files that I'm working with today. You can use those yourself. You can open them up in Notepad, modify them, save your own version. Very basic. I mean, if you simply start with that required line of Global Mapper script version 1, and then begin with some very basic parameters. Most scripts you run are probably going to have some sort of import function. There are exceptions to that, but most will. Import a file, see if that works for you, and then build parameters around that, build additional commands. So multiple ways of achieving that, but I think the bottom line here is don't be intimidated by scripting. It's not difficult. It's not overly complicated. You do not need to be a programmer. And worst thing that will happen is it will give you an error and it'll tell you that there's a problem with the script. And then you can rectify that. And by building a script incrementally, it's easier to detect what some of those errors are. So let's continue. We're working our way down through these script examples. I'm not going to do this one right now. This is basically the same as we did with our imagery. This is basically pointing to a directory of shapefiles. I'll do a version of that in just a second, but basically the same process, except in this case it's for our vector files. The file name mask I've defined as being the .shp. You'll notice my wildcard in here. This little asterisk is a wildcard. The reason I had to do that in this case, because if I import all of the files in this directory tree, those of you who are familiar with shapefiles will know that there's actually more than one file per shapefile. So I just want to point to the SHPs in this case, so that's why I've defined that as being the file name mask, just introducing another parameter in here. So I'm going to bypass that one in the interest of time. I will bring up the next one, where we introduce a second command. Now, the first line in this script is exactly the same as what I showed you before, where we import the script, import the files, and define the file name of the file type that we're looking for. But in this case, we're actually going to export as part of this workflow as well. And you'll notice import a directory tree and then export vector. There are multiple files, by the way. I'll let you into that secret. There are, I think, 9 or 10 shapefiles. We are exporting a single file using this mechanism. So while multiple files are imported, because we go with a standard export vector command, we are exporting a single file. And I'm going to make this a KML file at this location. Now, if I look at the directory highlighted, I actually have that as a window. There's nothing in here right now. We have a scripting data output folder, and if you download the sample data yourself, you'll find exactly the same. You'll find this output folder. It will be empty. So what we're going to do over the course of the next few scenarios is actually create some files that we can actually view in this folder. Now, because we're exporting, I'm actually going to change the way I actually drive the script. To this point, the scripts that I have been working with have been driven from within the software. I've gone to the File menu and run the script. I'm going to close down Global Mapper now. It's not even running. I am going to go back to the folder within which I had my script files. by default, or the way I had configured my system, when I double-click on each of these files, they will open up in Notepad. I'm going to change that now. I'm going to associate the GMS suffix with Global Mapper. And I can do that as a default. And you can do this in your setup as well. Right-click, open with, and then choose a default program. I'm using Windows 7 here. There's probably some variation depending on what version of Windows you're using. But this will allow me to choose, and I'm just going to choose the older version of Global Mapper 15. This is going to associate, because it's going to always use this program, it's going to associate GMS files with Global Mapper version 15. And we'll click OK. Now you will notice that the icons have changed. That's just a Windows function. It now puts the icon for Global Mapper in there. The reason I'm going to do this is because I can actually run this script without ever even opening up Global Mapper. The commands that I defined in here, the import, export it to KML, do not require me to even look at the software. If you want to still see the structure of the script, you can go back to open with, and you can choose Notepad. It will allow you to open the script file up and edit it or modify it in whatever way you want. But in its default form, if I double-click on the script, it's simply going to run the process. Now, you may see on the screen my little circle spinning here, indicating that something is happening, some process is going on. And if I go back into the output folder, you'll notice we now have a folder there called Texas. So there was no hands-on required there. I didn't have to visually verify the data. The data was in its defined directory, running the script, generated these output files. And just to verify that this actually worked, I'm just going to load up Global Mapper, and I'm going to drag and drop that file into the interface to load it up. So we took multiple shapefiles, and we generated a KML file from those. So that's basically a process where, again, hands-off, no visual reference needed, no visual interaction with the software. I was able to generate very quickly and very easily a single file from multiple shapefiles, and obviously convert it to a KML at the same time.
David, could you just clarify one point? Does Global Mapper need to be installed for the script to work?
Yes, it does. Although we didn't see, in this case, in this example, although we didn't actually see Global Mapper working, it was. Under the hood, the scripting engine was activated. Didn't see the interface. You didn't have to interact with it in any way, but it needed to be there. In other words, if I send this script to another user or a colleague, they do not have Global Mapper, obviously it will not convert KML or the shapefiles to KML files if they do not have Global Mapper running. So sharing, I'm noticing there's a question coming in here. I'm just trying to keep my eye over the questions tab about sharing scripts. Scripts can be shared, by the way. They're not version specific. They're not specific to a particular machine. Obviously, the directory path is important. If you're working on a network, then obviously that would be okay. Everybody maps the directory paths the same way on the network. You can certainly run scripts the same way. Or, as is the case if you're following along, at least write the data into the same directory, maybe on the root of your C drive. Then scripts can be transferred to other users as well. They may need to edit them on a case-by-case basis, but they certainly can be shared. Good questions. Keep them coming in, folks. So let's go back. I'm going to go up to my output because we are going to be writing additional files in here. And let's go back and look at some other examples. This is probably a more useful example of a script. Now, to this point, really, our workflow has been fairly, very basic. The basic importing and exporting processes. What I'm going to do now is something that actually takes a little more work if you try to do it within the software itself. We're going to essentially import our multiple shapefiles again, but in this case, we're actually going to export each one of those individual shapefiles to an individual KML file. Now, those of you who are familiar with Global Mapper are probably aware of the fact that when you import multiple files and go through a standard export, all of those files are, by default, merged together. This script I'm about to show you, again, I'm going to open this in Notepad to get a preview first, allows me to loop through all of the files in a defined directory and address each one individually. So the script structure is a little bit different. After my introductory line, you'll notice it says directory loop start. This is an indication that we're going to go through and loop through whatever process I'm defining, every file individually. And if I jump to the end of my commands, you'll notice I also have a directory loop ended. Those are required bookends for this procedure. I have to start the process, and I have to tell the scripting engine that we're done at the end. We're done with that looping process. So after the directory loop start, we then, again, as we did before, define the directory, which is the shapefile directory in which those dozen or so shapefiles reside. We're going to put our mask in there. And the files that we're importing, we're not importing an individual file, but we're going to import all of the file names within a directory with the directory name. This is basically what this line allows us to do. Each one is going to be addressed individually. We'll then export those, but rather than exporting as one file, because this is a looping process going through each file, we define the output location, which, again, that folder does not exist right now. It will be generated for us. But our exports are going to be the same file name that we imported, but we're going to remove the extension. Without extension is what this line allows us to do. In other words, we do not want to have .shp as part of our export because they're not shapefiles. Instead, what we want to do is include the name without extension and then put our own extension on there, which, again, because we've defined the export as KML, we'll put a .kml at the end. And type, just to confirm, our type is KML. So the overall structure is the same as importing a single file and exporting that file in a different format. But because we are going through this looping process, we apply additional parameters to allow it to do that. And again, using this basic structure, and again, if you've downloaded these files and you're using this script yourself, just simply redefine the location here. And you can run this script for a simple data conversion process. The onload all is a command I have not addressed yet. That's obviously fairly intuitive. This allows us to remove all loaded data during that loop. So in other words, it will not, after we run through one cycle to convert a file, it removes that file and begins the process again. Okay, so that is, again, hopefully going to, if I double-click, generate multiple KML files. My spinning wheel indicates that something is happening. While it's thinking, I'll go to the folder, output folder, happened pretty quickly. I now have an additional new folder, and you notice I did not have to create this folder first. I actually defined the folder in the output path. And again, multiple KML files in here, reflecting those that are in the original file. So that is an extremely useful application of scripting. Multiple files to multiple files. You may want to use this one as your own template if that defines a process that you routinely do in Global Mapper. Okay, now it's getting a little more interesting, I guess. Tiling. Oh, I messed up. I'd forgotten I reconfigured these to be recognized by Global Mapper. I've actually run this one already by double-clicking. I was hoping to open it in Notepad, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and look at what we just did, I guess, is the best way to approach this. We'll open this up in Notepad. Importing a file. This is a single file that we've imported. Our intention with this script is to export multiple tiles, to tile the imagery. Now, this mirrors the functionality that's available in virtually every export component of Global Mapper, where there's a tiling tab in the software, and you can define the tile variables, how many horizontal, how many vertical tiles do you want, etc., etc. And that's exactly what I've done in this second command, where I define export. It's a raster file. I'm exporting to a new directory called tiles. The base file name is going to be Augusta, and it's going to be a JPEG 2000. But because I'm tiling, as you'll notice at the end here, grid type, rows, and columns, it's going to create multiple versions of that file with an additional part of the name to distinguish the two. Spatial resolution is another element that I've added here for the export. This is based on the ground units, based on the projection of the file that I've imported. And moving backwards here, there are going to be JPEG 2000s. Type is JPEG 2000 files. So again, I've already done this. Sounds a little bit like a cooking show where I prepared it earlier. So let's go ahead and we'll go, oh, lo and behold, there's my tiles. And just to verify, we have now our tiles. By the way, the naming convention was just based on the defaults. I could have overridden that as well. Again, a parameter that's available for that particular command is to define the naming in a more customized way. But I generated 3 by 3, which, if my counting is correct, ends up with 9 tiles of imagery where we started with 1 file. So tiling can be automated, obviously, in the scripting process as well.
David, I think you've triggered some interest here talking about rasters. The questions come in, can you perform raster calculation using a script? So in between the import and export, can you run calculations?
Yes, you can. I'm actually going to bring up my browser at this stage. Chrome, hopefully I'll not use too much of our bandwidth here, and show you where the list of commands is available. Maybe go back up one level. I'll actually show you how to navigate here. So I'm going to the Blue Marble Geo homepage here, a little slow in its response. Under support, in our knowledge base, you will find a link that shows you the Global Mapper scripting language reference. And it's a very, very simple web page that goes through, first of all, each of the commands. And then for each of these commands, and these are linked, by the way, this will jump you to the appropriate section of the page. And for each command, it will show you, for instance, let me go down a little bit, well, there we go. There's what you were asking, apply formula. This is our raster calculation functionality now supported as a script. These commands reflect that first command that I put in all of my scripts. Let me go back up to the topic and maybe to make this more meaningful. The import command, for instance. If I select the import command, I'm just going to click on it now, and you'll see for importing all of the parameters that can be applied. The type of feature, sampling method if that's appropriate for your data, etc., etc., etc. This guide is indispensable if you're doing scripting, because this is essentially the translation. This is like the dictionary, if you like, that allows you to see what's supported and what's not supported. And again, to answer the question that was asked, yes, raster calculation, as you'll see, first option here, apply formula, applies a formula to loaded raster layers to create a new one. That's our raster calculation capability.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Reprojection. Inevitably, we're going to get to reprojection. This requires a little bit of extra work, and it does define how many people use Global Mapper. I've got shapefiles in a certain projection, and my workflow is to reproject them. I've got 200 shapefiles. Do you mean I have to import each one and do it individually? Well, no, you don't. Based on the looping process I've just shown you, you can certainly do this in a batch or a bulk form, if you like. Let me open this one very quickly, because this is going to look a little different. Now, don't be intimidated. There's a little bit more information in here by way of requiring a reprojection. You will notice the first command is to define the projection and then give it a name. So define projection, you'll see that in the list of commands, by the way, on the web page I just showed you. That's an available command. One of the parameters is the projection name, and this can be anything. I'm just typing in LAMCC. This is Lambert Conformal Conic and WGS84. So basically, what I've done in the first line is define that I want to define a projection, and I've given it a name. I then put in the projection parameters. The projection, the datum, the units, Z units if they're applicable, meters, X shift, Y shift, and other parameters. Now, if this looks a little overwhelming, intimidating, don't worry, because I'm going to show you how you can actually populate this information by simply manually reprojecting a map within Global Mapper before you address the script. But essentially, between define projection and end define projection, all that we've done is define those parameters. Okay? Now, remember that. We will come back and visit this just a little bit later. Thereafter, we go through the standard procedure where we import a file. It's the US states. We looked at this one previously. Then we load the projection. And when you put the command load projection, the required parameter is to tell us what projection you want to load. And we've already done that. We've defined the projection previously in the script. As for projection name, you'll notice this is actually up here. And we'll give it the same name. So it's going to reproject this data using this projection. And then just to see the results of that, we're going to edit that file, and I'm going to edit it as a shapefile. And again, certain parameters, it's shapefile, areas, and I do want a projection file, a PRJ file as part of that. So again, the process requires you to define the projection, and then just you run through the normal scripting process. So remember back to when we looked at that shapefile of the states? It was geographically projected. We're going to reproject it to Lambert using this script. So again, this is, because it's associated with Global Mapper, it's simply a double click. We'll wait for my spinning wheel to go away, and when it does, we will have reprojected that file. And this is one that we do need to verify visually, obviously, in this case, having just performed that reprojection. This is the folder I just created. This is my new shapefile, and I'm just going to drag and drop to import, and hopefully this will be there we go, Lambert Conformal Conic. I defined the parameters in the shapefile, it reprojected it for me. So reprojection, again, a very common application for scripting, very straightforward as far as the implementation. Obviously defining those projection parameters, you need to get it right. You need to get those right first. And again, remind me later, Josie, I will show you how that can be done in a very streamlined way. You don't have to manually type that information.
I think that could be a little daunting.
A little daunting is right. A little daunting is a good definition of that. So let's keep going here. I know the clock is not in our favor here. I want to jump ahead maybe to a couple of more interesting ones. Cropping. I'll show you some of these scripts without running them. I'll tell you what it does. I think that's probably the easiest way to use our time wisely. This is an example of a script where I want to apply a crop. In other words, I'm going to bring in some imagery and I'm going to define what I want to actually export, defined by the bounds of an existing feature. And that feature is actually in another file. It's a shapefile. And what I've done here, if I highlight this entire parameter, is polygon crop file, and then defined where that file is located. And it's a simple circle in this case, and it's a shapefile. And end result of that is while I import the entire imagery defined in this file, what's exported is constrained to the extent of the circle. So again, with apologies with our time not being on our side, this is one you can run again. If you download these files yourself, you'll get a little circular output of some imagery at this location. We can create a new folder. So with apologies, we'll keep going. Clipping the collar, this is a function that mirrors, again, a component of Global Mapper itself. Again, I'll open this up very quickly. There is, for those of you who are not aware, a tool in Global Mapper to automatically clip the collar from a topographic map, and that's a very specific function, auto clip collar. During import, you'll see when I import the file, I clip the collar out, which removes the information that's outside of the map itself for our topographic map. This is a USGS quad map that I'm importing, and we have a clip collar command. I'm just giving you some examples of some of these parameters that are available for some of the commands that we've been using. Let's do the next one. I'm going to right-click and open this in Notepad again, and again, we've been using the import command a lot during our almost every script in some way, shape, or form had required an import. Defining the location of the file. You'll notice in this case it's a LAS file, and I've defined that as a type. It's a LiDAR file. Basically, I'm importing a point cloud. The point cloud, as those of you who are aware or work with LiDAR, is the raw material that allows you to create an elevation surface model, a terrain surface model perhaps. The script that I've generated here is basically taking that point cloud, generating some elevation data, and then exporting that in a global mapper grid file. So I'm taking points, gridding them, and then exporting them into a proprietary format, but this also could be a DEM or could be any of the other supported formats. The generate elevation is a process that's applied to whatever data Global Mapper sees, which in this case is what I've just imported. And again, parameters can be applied, elevation units, meters in this case, but you have additional parameters, resolution, et cetera, that can be applied. So we'll run this one, and just remembering the location, there's going to be hopefully a new folder called LiDAR. We'll go ahead and close it and double-click on this script and wait for my spinning circle to disappear. And while it's done doing that, I guess I can go to the output directory, and this one's taking a little longer because it's there's more data involved, but we do now have a LiDAR folder, and we have a GMG file, and if everything goes according to plan, we have taken some LiDAR point cloud data and automatically gridded it. Now, again, a precursor for what's coming next month. We are going to be introducing Global Mapper 16 in a more formal way next month, introducing some of the new functionality. There have been significant enhancements with regard to LiDAR, and indeed some of those carry over into the scripting functionality as well. Automatic classification functionality, feature extraction functionality. Just teasing you a little bit for this month, but we'll get back into looking at some of these a little bit later next month. Okay. So what else have we got? Creating contours. Let's take a look at that one. This is a very common application that we hear from our users of Global Mapper. I want to import some elevation data. Perhaps I want to import some LiDAR data, generate an elevation surface, but ultimately I need to generate some contours. And we've heard from many of our users that that is actually a very, very straightforward process in the interface itself. What I've done here in the script is basically define those parameters in an automated way. Again, I'm starting with my basic LAS file, the same raw material, generating the grid as I did before. This time another new command, generate contours. And I've defined my contour interval as 1 meter, elevation units as meters in this case. So you could obviously put whatever unit of measure you want. And then again, this time I'm exporting as a shapefile. So it's a similar process as before, but the output in this case is actually going to be a shapefile. I will run this one as well very quickly. Again, remembering that there's multiple processes involved. There's multiple steps involved. This takes a little bit longer. Again, waiting for my spinning circle to disappear. We should see some, I can't remember the name of the folder, but it should generate a new folder for us. I think it's called Contours. We'll find out in just a second. Again, bringing in LiDAR, gridding it, generating the contours, then exporting. So it's thinking, there we go. And there's my contours. And this is a simple shapefile. And again, I like the visual verification, so we'll just drop my shapefile onto the map, And there's my 1 meter contours derived from what was a few minutes ago just a raw LiDAR point cloud. I'm going to get back to contours just a little bit to show you another creative use of the scripting function. We have a couple more I want to show you here as well. Watershed generation, equal value. Let me look at the watershed generation one. I'm not going to run this one, but we'll just show you very quickly the format. We're basically importing a pre-existing DEM here, a DEM that we've used quite a lot in our demonstrations and certainly in our training. It's a USGS DEM. We're generating a watershed with specific stream thresholds. Now, if you try to embark on a watershed generation process using scripting, we'll probably tell you, no, start with the actual interface itself so you understand what these variables mean. When you're comfortable with the actual process in Global Mapper, then you can come back in here and stream threshold, max depth, etc. will mean a lot more. So this is an example of a script which really requires you to have understanding of how the function works in Global Mapper before you actually define the parameters within the script itself. So we're basically in this case generating a flow to position. We're defining a watershed that shows the catchment area that flows to a point defined by an X and Y here. So perhaps this is a drinking water source, and we want to delineate using this mechanism what flows to that source. And again, this reflects functionality that's available in the application itself. We're then also generating an area through export, and we're also going to generate some lines which represent the stream channels. So multiple steps in this script, basically the end result of which is 2 shapefiles, one with the catchment area, which is essentially the watershed, defining the flow to this point, and the drainage channels as well. And again, feel free to modify this in your own case if you've downloaded the data. And we're getting towards the top of the hour here, so I'm going to bypass this one for the time being. I do want to show you this last one because this brings in multiple functions in Global Mapper that are useful not only in the context of scripting, but also within the application itself. And we'll go ahead and open this one. This is the last one we're going to run here. So, again, Global Mapper script version 1, we're importing our DEM as before. We're defining a shader in this case, the shader name. Now, those of you who've used Global Mapper will be familiar with the shader options when you're working with elevation data. Default being Atlas shader. We also have a gradient shader, global shader. You can customize the shader. You can generate your own shader pattern. Each of those has a name, whether it be something that's pre-configured or pre-installed with the software or something you've created yourself. And basically what we're doing here is we're defining what slope shader, or what shader we want to apply to this imported elevation model. And in this case, we're defining our slope shader. Interesting visualization of terrain, by the way, if you haven't used this already. It shows you slope angles instead of actual elevation. So if you want to see what's flat, what's not so flat, perhaps for a construction project, this is a great way to visualize your terrain. In the script, we're basically defining that is the shader pattern we want to apply. And because that has been applied, we're going to then apply another command, which is generating equal value areas. In the context of the software itself, we can do this using 2 variables, either the actual color values or the slope values, depending on how the data has been configured. Now, because we have configured our data to have the slope shader, in this case, we can define slope value thresholds. In other words, we're vectorizing those slope values based on a range, and my slope distance here is defined as 3, and that will be 3 degrees. I'm going to generate a new attribute. This is, by the way, going to generate a shapefile or a vector area layer for us. And within that, I'm going to have an attribute called slope that's going to define the slope angles. So again, we're bringing in an elevation model, displaying it based on slopes, and this is a raster layer. We're then going to vectorize it, and those vectors are going to define slope thresholds, and then we're going to export that as a shapefile so we can see the results. And again, the parameters, or the command and parameter on the last section here is just basically the same export to shapefile function. So crossing my fingers, that is hopefully what we will see when we run this script. Oh, I forgot to look at the output location. Hopefully that will be pretty intuitive as well. But we'll go ahead and run that one and navigate to our output directory one last time. And I'm assuming I would have called this the folder slopes. We'll see. Oh, there we go. Slopes is right there. So what started with a raster elevation layer through a configuration that allowed us to visualize those, and obviously we didn't see that ourselves, but change the visual characteristics to represent slopes, we were able to generate what you see on the map, which is basically a vector layer that defines slope thresholds. We could put up a legend here to visualize this more clearly. If I use my feature info button and I choose an area, you'll notice the values that have been associated, including the slope angle range, minimum maximum slope angle within that area, and the slope value of the middle point, which is our center point, which is 3 right here. So that was a multiple step process, again, defined in a script, taking a raw elevation model and a raster elevation model, and then generating a vector, a series of vector features that could then be queried, filtered, or translated or converted into any other format as necessary. So those are just some basic examples of scripts, and again, apologies I didn't get to play with all of them. I mean, very intuitive, hopefully, and again, if you've downloaded this data, feel free to modify these and do whatever you want with them. There are a couple of additional things I want to show you in the final 5 minutes. To address the question that came in, Josie, I think we had one that was asking about how do you begin the process of creating a script.
Yes,
I'm going to show you exactly how we can do that. I'm going to import a file manually. If memory serves, I have a file here called US States. We actually imported this file using a script previously. And you'll see now my script has been imported. I'm going to reproject this. Now this, if you remember, is something we actually did with our script before, but I want to do this in the software itself. I'm going to choose my projection tab, and I want to choose Lambert conformal conic, exactly the same script we used previously. And my central meridian in this case, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to make this 100, minus 100 actually, to be 100 degrees west of the prime meridian. So basically, these are my reprojection parameters. I'm not concerned about any of the other variables. Actually, I will change this to WGS84. We'll choose that from the list. Scrolling down a little further to the W's. Oops, a little too far. There we go. So basically what I'm doing here, again, manually in the software, importing a shapefile, reference to geographic lat long, reprojecting it to Lambert conformal conic. We will obviously see the results of that on the screen. When my screen redisplays, we are now seeing a reprojected map. That is the global projection and global mapper. I am going to save this as a workspace. Now, the workspace has not been saved yet. I can either save or save as. And I'm actually going to drop this right on my desktop, and we'll take a look at it in just a minute. I'm just going to call this test, and we will go ahead and save. Now, if I go to my desktop and I open this GMW file in Notepad, this is a GMW, this is a workspace file. Anybody who has used Global Mapper will be familiar with this file format. You will see that the first line in your workspace looks remarkably familiar. Global Mapper script version 1. Within this, you will notice as well the parameters, basically, or the commands and parameters that I followed when I reprojected. I imported, there's my source file, type is shapefile. There's a lot of this is redundant. You don't need to have all of this information. You'll notice as well, define projection. My projection name and the projection parameters are all listed here. And then we have end define projection. This section right here is really all that I would need to create a script that simply reprojects any data that I use with that script. So there is a fantastic template for scripting. It's generating a workspace. Now, obviously, the workspace has a GMW suffix. You can simply change the suffix to GMS, and it will behave just like the scripts I showed you before.
David, is it easier to go through this way to get that reprojection template than through the scripting reference?
Scripting reference would work, but what I was able to do with the example I showed you is to define those projection parameters visually. I saw the results. I can see the results here, and maybe I need to change the central meridian. Maybe I need to change something that's not what I expect. And then saving that workspace, that becomes the template. But it could be done either way. You can certainly do that within the script, using the scripting reference information as well. Okay, I promised that was the last one. I was lying. There's one more I want to show you. And this is the implementation of a script in a very, very simple workflow process. What I'm going to do is load a simple file. I'm actually going to load an elevation tile here. Now, I have pre-configured a script to generate some contours. I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to run the script like we did at the start based on this loaded data, and I'm not even going to preview the script. It's just generate contours for the loaded data. I'm going to make sure it applies based on the loaded data. You can see the script itself, generate contours, elevation units, meters, interval 5. I'm also generating spot elevations just for fun. I'm just going to run the script. And you can see the results on the screen, as you would expect. Okay, here's where it becomes really useful. In my keyboard shortcut list, if I go and set up a customized keyboard shortcut, one of the options I have is to run the last script. Run the last script as a command. I'm going to assign my keyboard shortcut of F3 to perform that function. For no particular reason, you can choose any keyboard shortcut you want, and we'll add that one to the list. So in other words, F3 will run the last script for me. Okay, we'll go ahead and close that window, and I'm going to unload that data and bring in another imagery tile. Got a few here. You can't see what I'm doing, you have to take my word for it. I'm simply going to click F3 on my keyboard, and I've generated contours. So there's an application of a script where it's not done externally. It's obviously done with data that's been loaded. But I can simplify. I didn't have to manually configure the contours every time. That script retains those contour parameters for me and lets me do do multiple tiles. Over a series of just separate imports. So import a different area, hit the F3 button in my case, and it generates those contours based on that set of parameters. Thinking about the assignment of a script on a keyboard shortcut opens up a world of possibilities as far as your workflow in Global Mapper is concerned. It really gives you a lot of powerful functionality. Any final questions, or did we answer them all?
Well, there are a few more, but let's just hit
We've got
this
time for one, probably.
Okay. Does Global Mapper support Python scripting?
No. I guess the easy one. Python scripting is more of a programming language. As you'll hopefully have seen with what I've demonstrated today, the Global Mapper approach to scripting is to simplify. We try to keep the process a lot more straightforward. So no, not Python scripting, but simply ASCII text-based scripting.
Great, thanks.
Except we have run out of time, top of the hour. Time flies when you're having fun. We will, as I said at the start, be introducing Global Mapper 16 next month. Check your email boxes in the next few days. I think we're about to send out an announcement, or if we haven't done so already. If you're not a subscriber, if you don't get our emails, you can go to our website, and we give you the option of registering there. Certainly, you will find, I'm giving you a little teaser here, Global Mapper 16 has got some really, really cool new stuff in there. So looking forward to speaking with about that next month.
Great, and hopefully our support team was able to answer all your questions that you asked, and we'll follow up with you if we haven't gotten to those yet. So on your screen, you'll see our support email address that you can use if questions come up in the future. And as always, this webinar is recorded and will be posted on our website within the next few days. If you need more details on the other feature functions in Global Mapper, check out some of the other webinars on that list. And thank you for attending, and thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Josie, for your help. Thank you for keeping those questions coming. And just a reminder again, if you are looking at the recording, the files that I used today will be available. There'll be a zip file you can download as well. Read the README file for the specific instructions, and hopefully you can have some fun with these files as well. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Josie.
You're welcome. Thanks.